Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 12. BZZZ. 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 Naruto slowly cracked an eye open as the alarm on his nightstand started buzzing louder. Grunting, he pulled his arm out from underneath the sheets, reaching over and smacking the top of the clock none too lightly, activating the snooze button. Yawning now, he brought the hand back and briefly rubbed it over his eyes and forehead. Blinking quickly as he adjusted to the sunlit room, Naruto moved his hand away from his face and let his hand rest on his chest, his mind going over what was planned for the day. Get up, get dressed, pick up some of those new kunai from the blacksmith, apply the seals, then stop by the guild to say goodbye. Naruto's eyes opened fully as he remembered. Erza had been going on about this mission all week, wanting to take it because it paid well and would be easy for them to finish quickly, so they could stay away from the hectic guild for a few days and take a small kind of vacation. It was their anniversary of sorts, after all. Supposedly 18 months warranted a small celebration. As he got older, Naruto stopped paying much attention to dates, though he learned quickly that Erza at least expected him to remember a few of them. She never forgot the day he arrived at the guild, the day they became partners, his birthday, or the day he saved the lives of the takeover trio. The only dates that she absolutely demanded he remember were her birthday and their anniversary, so anything else he managed to recall was just a bonus. So of course, he had no problem remembering when their first-year anniversary had arrived, and had taken her shopping for anything she wanted, even if it was for a new set of armor. However, much to his surprise, she had settled for a pair of earrings that closely resembled his kunai in their shape, only they were miniatures compared to the original size. Erza had suggested that he get a pair for himself too, and after a little thought, he decided to go ahead. Then she had asked for him to make her some ramen. That itself was unusual, she barely ever ate the stuff, even he had cut back considerably. But as they ate their ramen together at his place, the evening sun streaming through the kitchen windows, the whole thing just seemed, well, perfect. The serene smile on her face as they chatted about random things was something that he'd do anything to see again. A weight pressing up against his side caused Naruto's head to shift to his left, where he glimpsed at a contented face with a head of dark red hair resting against his bare arm. One of Erza's arms slowly snaked its way across his chest, under his own hand and arm, eventually coming to a rest as it draped completely across him from underneath the sheets. Erza, Erza, he was talking in a murmur in case she wasn't awake yet, but he had a feeling the alarm had woken her up as well. It usually did when she slept over at his place. Over the last handful of months or so, she spent every day at his house if they were both in Magnolia Town. It was even beginning to show in various places around his home, the occasional suit of armor propped up against random walls or weapons left on top of any relatively flat surface, or the fact that she had taken over several of his dressers in his room and tables in his workshop for her own personal use was ample proof. It was getting to the point where even other members of Fairy Tail noticed it, whenever they stopped by for various reasons. Gray would usually just roll his eyes, and Natsu was forever oblivious, though Naruto suspected some of it was starting to be an act. Lizana would get a sly grin and start to joke with Erza about making Naruto pick up after her, and Elfman would smirk but otherwise remain silent. Mirajan, however, was the most open about it. She would start flirting with him in front of anyone, asking if he minded if she left stuff lying around too. He flirted back, of course, though they were both well aware that nothing would come from it. Fortunately or unfortunately, it did leave him open to getting pranked, as on more than one occasion he was finding things where he shouldn't have. Things he knew Erza didn't own, like underwear that was nearly transparent in places or had frills. Or tops that showed way too much cleavage. Sure, Erza would occasionally wear something that was fairly revealing, but never to the extent of what the planted clothing showed off, especially not in public. As a matter of fact, he found out a little more about Erza's dressing habits purely by chance. After they had been dating for about 2 months, Erza managed to discover that he had 3 rather interesting books he was planning to publish which had been written by his godfather. That she didn't immediately kill him, he felt relieved. That she actually seemed somewhat interested, he felt wary. One day about a week after her discovery, he came home from an assignment to find her dressed up in a very familiar outfit and acting out a very familiar scene, and he decided to play along for the hell of it. The end result was definitely worth it, and he felt like he was in heaven. Eventually, Erza ended up publishing the books for him, through her business front. Naruto just knew his old perverted godfather was either laughing his ass off from the afterlife, or cheering for him. Knowing Jiraiya, probably both. Erza murmured something against his arm, pulling him out of his musing, but it was nothing that he could understand even with his enhanced hearing. I couldn't hear what you said. He could see as Erza shifted slightly, the sheet moving down along her arm to expose her pajama-clad shoulder. Naruto felt her breath against his skin as she inhaled deeply, then spoke up again, clearer this time. Naruto couldn't stop the small chuckle that escaped his lips as Erza yawned cutely in the middle of starting to talk. Just 5 more minutes. If I let you get up in 5 minutes, you're going to get mad at me. You're the one who told me to mock. He stopped talking abruptly as she shifted, moving one of her legs to rest on top of his. Her thigh just so happened to bump against something of his, causing her to giggle. So bad. He sighed in exasperation, fully awake now. It's biological. I can't stop it. We've been over this. Trust me, I know. Naruto felt a light wetness as she kissed his shoulder, since he typically didn't wear a shirt to bed anymore. He had continued wearing his mesh undershirt to sleep out of habit, up until Erza started sleeping over at his place. After the first night she had managed to somehow get several strands of her hair tangled in the mesh. Needless to say, it wasn't a pretty sight. Her arm slowly worked its way back across his chest, only for her hand to stop in the middle, then slowly start moving down to his abdomen. Erza, not that I'd be complaining normally, but you did warn me last night that you wanted to leave early today. I don't want to get in trouble. Ignoring him, Erza snaked her hand under the elastic waistband of his pajama pants, reached around for a few seconds, then grabbed him and squeezed. At this point, his hormones were seriously considering calling for a mutiny against his finally maturing logical self. Self-preservation might have had a little say in the matter as well, helping hold the tide against the hormonal onslaught. Don't you remember what you told me last night? Not saying anything else, Erza shifted a little more against him, so that part of her body was now on top of his. He was definitely feeling a lot more skin against his body now than he should, which could only mean that she had unbuttoned her pajama top with her other hand since she had started this little scene. Look, I should seriously get up and make breakfast. I don't know how coherent you are right now, but I really have no desire to be in trouble later. You are the one who warned me not to sleep in today so we can relax on the train on the way. If we're late. Erza's face hovered over his for a second, and she gave him a brief half-lidded smile. It'll be okay. Giving him a brief peck on the lips, he went to return the quick kiss until she pulled away, then started planting gentle kisses along his jaw. Need to shave. He considered rolling his eyes. That was the one thing she constantly nagged him about, but she squeezed him again, and any remark he would have made died on his lips instantly. Facial hair had started showing up out of nowhere just a little over a year ago. He always thought it was unusual that he never had any, and even Jiraiya had seemed clueless as to the cause. After a while he didn't think much of it, but when it started growing like crazy, he immediately started harping on the Kyuubi, believing his resident demon to be the cause of the sudden change. The bastard, however, simply stated that he could not alter Naruto's physical makeup in any way even though he desperately wished to. The seal prevented it. The only thing Kyuubi could do would be to give him his own furry parts temporarily, but Naruto did not want to risk Erza possibly becoming addicted. No way. Feeling her tongue flick against his nipple caused him to rather quickly snap back to reality. She didn't linger there long, however, and continued kissing down his body under the sheets. Erza, I hope you're fully awake by now. I am so not getting in trouble with you for TU. Warm. It felt so good already. Naruto's brain went to mush as logic fell to the wayside and his hormonal drive took the reins. She wanted 5 minutes. He could do that. Hell, he'd give her 50. Bzzz. Bzzz. Bzz thump. Damn Clo-un. Fairy Tail caused trouble again. They destroyed the Devon Thief family, but also destroyed 7 other houses that belonged to the townspeople. A pretty young blonde girl started snickering as her eyes scanned the article in Weekly Sorcerer magazine. Usually the magazine reported that fairy tales missions were a big success, but occasionally there were a few that caused a lot of collateral damage. As the girl continued reading, she started snickering in earnest from where she sat on a bench near a park. Finally it appeared as though she reached a point where she couldn't stifle the giggles anymore, and burst out laughing in earnest. She clutched the magazine to her large chest as she laughed uproariously for several moments before finishing with a sigh. "Ah, that's way too much. Those crazy mages. Still, to be a fairy tale mage, I wonder how someone joins. Do you need to learn strong magic, or are there just a bunch of interviews?" The girl flipped through a couple more pages before stopping on one that looked interesting. Very interesting, now that she looked closer. There was a small picture of Fire Shadow, the one that they used whenever they had information about him. Over the years it became apparent that Weekly Sorcerer was the only magazine Fire Shadow ever talked to, and even then there was only one journalist in their entire staff that he allowed interviews from as well. The blonde teenage girl was a proud member of the Fire Shadow fan club that Weekly Sorcerer sponsored, and had even been to a few of the club meetings. She even had her membership pin with her membership number on it, and was completely giddy when she found out that she was member number 105. She had overheard some other girls talking about being members while in the town she was currently visiting, and heard that one of them was in the 10,000s. Reading the article carefully now, the girl realized that it didn't really have much of anything new that she didn't already know. It was more or less an update, and also said what missions Fire Shadow had completed with his team, Red Twilight. Of course, exactly who the members of that team were was still a secret that he kept, along with his real name. Her heart began beating faster as she continued reading, discovering where this particular mini-interview had taken place. Quickly flipping over to the next page, she saw the first 2 pages of the Mirajan reviewer photo shoot, and sighed wistfully. "Mirajan is so glamorous. I'm jealous." Mirajan was wearing a rather simple bikini compared to some others that the girl had seen used for reviewer shots, but it didn't really matter because Mirajan was incredibly pretty anyway. Turning the page yet again, the girl was shocked to see another set of modeling photos, yet this time it was of Erza. Erza the Titania. No way, she's never posed for one of these before. She's so pretty too. I hope being good looking isn't a requirement to join. She was confident in her looks, certainly, but compared to women like Mirajan and Erza, there was no contest. Erza's dark red hair stood out in contrast with her slightly tan skin and black bikini. The sly smirk on her face only accentuated her features. Sighing to herself, the girl tried to turn the page, only to realize she was at the centerfold. Curious as to who got it, she opened it and spread it out on the bench, only for her jaw to suddenly drop. Fire Shadow was in it. He was wearing swim trunks that males commonly wore, only his were a rare bright orange. The mage was sitting on a beach towel, legs folded pretzel style, and was leaning back against a rather large beach ball. He also still had his mask on, she noticed with a slight twinge of disappointment. He looked to be a bit sweaty, or perhaps even oiled up for the shot, since she could see the ridges of his muscles on his upper body. Those abs. The girl forced her eyes away from the picture for a moment to calm herself down, then looked back at it again. Now her eyes picked up a few other things, those other things being both of the other girls. Mirajan was laying down on the blanket, her silver hair billowing out over Naruto's crossed legs as her head rested in his lap. Erza, meanwhile, was leaning back against one of Fire Shadow's arms, her own arms up high in the air as some of her long red hair dangled from her fingers. While Mirajan had her eyes closed and had a peaceful expression on her face, Erza had her eyes only partially closed and was facing the camera with a coy smile. It made the girl wonder if Fire Shadow was doing something that the camera couldn't see, but both of his hands were visible, resting on the towel. The rest of his body language didn't seem to give anything away, and overall he looked rather comfortable too. Slowly closing the centerfold, the blonde teenager noticed that there were more photos on the back of it, though they were smaller than the standard pictures. Glancing through them, most of them seemed to be the usual fare of the girls doing various poses, and even Fire Shadow showed up in a couple of them, usually with one of the 2 girls holding onto or pressing against him somewhere, but never both of them. That didn't change until the end of the series, which started making her giggle again. In the first, Mirajan had somehow gotten Fire Shadow's mask, and was wearing it. She had bent over quite a bit so her cleavage was quite easy notice, and she was waving at the camera. Fire Shadow was turned away from the camera, of course, but it was also easy enough to see that Erza had one of her hands over Fire Shadow's eyes, as her other hand pointed at Mirajan, and it looked like she was yelling. In the next picture, Mirajan was covering her now naked chest as she was blushing and chasing Erza, who was running away from the other woman, Mirajan's top clenched in her hand. Fire Shadow was facing the camera now, clearly shrugging. His mask was back on, but he was clenching what looked to be a slightly bloody towel in one of his hands. Giggling, the girl slowly closed the magazine and laid her head back, sighing. I bet it would be fun to join Fairy Tail. I wish I could. I see, so you want to join Fairy Tail. The girl yelped in shock as a deep male voice spoke right in her ear. Turning quickly, she noticed a head and shoulders that were sticking out of the bush behind the bench. She immediately recognized the man, including the smug grin on his face. You again. His grin grew even more smug, if such a thing was possible, as he started climbing out of the bush. I've been looking all over for you. I really wanted to invite a beautiful young lady such as yourself to a party on my ship tonight. The girl's eyes narrowed as she looked at the man in front of her. She had met him once before, by chance, on the street just barely an hour ago. He had charmed a crowd of females, and she felt a spell of some sort start to fall over her as well until a teenage boy with pink hair walked by and interrupted it. Listen buddy, let me tell you something. Your charm won't work on me anymore. The weak thing about charm spells is that if someone knows they are happening, they are completely useless. Not seeming to be insulted in the least, the man's smile grew even larger. Ah, I knew you were a mage when our eyes met for the very first time. It is perfectly fine if the spell doesn't work, I don't really need it anyway. He gave her a small bow. I will simply be happy if you show up. The blonde girl contemplated his offer for all of 3 seconds before offering him a sneer. There is no way I'd come to such a nasty guy's party. That seemed to make him stumble for a second. This time his eyes became saucers. Nasty. Me. The girl placed her hands on her hips. I'm talking about the charm you used. Do you really want to be popular so badly? Only losers use spells like that. You must be an amateur, not even close to being a popular mage. She turned away in a huff, not even bothering to stand around and let him explain. She managed to get several steps away before he managed any kind of recovery. Wait, you want to join Fairy Tail, right? That stopped her dead in her tracks. She slowly peered over her shoulder, eyes narrowed as she gazed at him cautiously. Yeah, what about it? Have you ever heard of Salamander? Fairy Tail's Salamander. The girl turned around a little, eyes opening. Yes, of course I have. Everyone has heard of him by now. The rumor is that he is Fire Shadow's apprentice. Wait. She thought about what she knew of the man in front of her. After the charm spell was broken, he had signed his name as Salamander on a piece of paper that he gave to the pink-haired boy. He had used a purple flame to float on as he left the scene too. It was purple, and it wasn't very hot either, but it was still a flame. Since he signed his name as Salamander, plus the whole fire part, and Salamander was a member of Fairy Tail. Wait, oh my gosh, are you one of the mages of Fairy Tail? Her question was shouted in a piercing shriek, causing Salamander to wince slightly before he smiled and slowly nodded. Yes, I am. I can talk to the master if you're interested in joining. The girl simply stared at him in open-mouthed shock for several seconds before promptly running up and pressing herself against his side, a big smile on her face. The party is going to be awesome, I just know it. Salamander gave an airy laugh, gently trying to push her away from him. That's a little too obvious, you can stop. Completely oblivious to anything he was saying, she moved to stand right in front of him, stars in her eyes as she clasped her hands together. Can I really join Fairy Tail? Of course. Just don't tell anyone about the charm. Charm? What charm? The girl gave a silly little laugh as she shook her head and shrugged her shoulders. May I get your name, so that I can add it to the party guest list, and tell my master about you? Huh, oh, my name is Lucy. He nodded, and looked off into the distance for a moment. Well, Lucy, my dear, it has been a pleasure. Hopefully I shall see you at the party tonight. It shouldn't be hard to spot when you get to the docks. Ta for now. You bet. Lucy watched until she could no longer see Salamander's back, then something in her brain seemed to click back into awareness. Oh, crap, I must have fallen for some kind of pseudo-charm for a minute there. Thinking about it, a smile slowly began to creep across her face. But who cares? I'll just put up with him for a little while until I join Fairy Tail, then ignore him. Woohoo! I'm back. Oh, welcome back, Natsu. Happy. Lucy quickly stepped inside, behind Natsu, who was currently stomping on the ground as he walked up to someone that was pointing and laughing at him. Just as the door swung closed behind her, Natsu lifted up a foot and promptly smashed it into his unsuspecting victim's face. You bastard! You lied to me. The information you gave me about Salamander was fake. The man he kicked in the face flew backwards and crashed into the backs of two others, who promptly turned and began throwing things from their table at Natsu. The pink-haired teen simply swatted them out of the air, then let out a yell and charged at them. It didn't take much longer for others to start joining in. Lucy stood there in awe, barely registering that Happy had his wings on and flew to somewhere near the back of the room. This was it. She had only seen it in pictures before. The Guild Hall of Fairy Tail. Her thoughts were interrupted as someone with dark hair shouted out close to her ear. Did someone say that Natsu is back? We still need to settle our fight from last time. Come get me, Natsu. There was a shout from somewhere in the middle of the fight, but someone else spoke up, causing Lucy to turn and look at the girl. Gray, are you seriously going to fight dressed, or should I say, undressed like that? Huh, oh, shit, not again. The woman sighed. I usually don't mind, but in front of a guest. Come on, Gray. Gray shook his head. It can wait, Kana. Turning to see Natsu emerge from the growing pile of bodies, he promptly took off in that direction. Natsu, I'm coming for you. What rubbish. Lucy stood up straight as a shadow loomed over her, then turned her head slowly to see a very tall man with white hair and a scar running from his cheek to just under his eye. She didn't know if he was making a general comment, but the scowl on his face didn't give the impression that whatever he was thinking about was pleasant. Kana giggled, and Lucy watched wide-eyed as she grabbed a barrel filled with some kind of drink, then took a swig directly from the tap. Setting it down, she shot the tall man a grin. Take it easy, Elfman. Everyone likes to cut loose now and then, and poor Gray has been bored out of his mind these past few days, even though he'd never admit it. Still, all this loud yapping in the middle of the day. They aren't little kids anymore. They need to let their fists do the talking. That's the manly way to handle things. Watch. Elfman started lumbering towards the group, only to immediately get knocked to the ground as Natsu and Gray performed an amazing combo attack on him, right before throwing yet another punch at each other. Man, it's so noisy in here. Lucy tore her eyes away from the still growing pile of unconscious bodies as another voice spoke up near her. As soon as she laid eyes on him, there was instant recognition. He had orange blonde hair, several piercings in his ears, and was wearing sunglasses inside. Ah, Loki, you're ranked as the mage women most want to have as their boyfriend, bi-weekly sorcerer, just beating out Fire Shadow. Though that's probably just because no one has ever seen his face and we don't know his real name. Loki tossed her a quick grin and was about to say something further, but two random girls came out of nowhere and immediately latched onto him. As they began squealing and cooing at him, he immediately blushed, then tried to act macho about going to join the fight. Lucy swayed for a moment, stunned, then sat down on a nearby stool, her pristine view of her second favorite fairy tale mage ruined. He was nothing but a womanizer. She leaned forward, placing her face in her hands. What's with these people? None of them are normal at all. Is that a problem? The blonde girl shot straight up in her seat, and looked to her left. Another girl was sitting on a stool next to her, and was giving her a small smile. She had white hair that was cut short in a bob, teal blue eyes, and a fairy tale guild insignia displayed prominently at the top of her left arm. As her eyes looked down towards the girl's lap, she noticed Happy was currently sitting there, in bliss, as the girl idly scratched behind his ears. And no, it's not really a problem. It's just different. It's not so bad once you get used to it. Ah, Lizanna, you've greeted the visitor already. Lucy turned to her other side as another voice arrived behind her. Lizanna answered as a blush rapidly worked its way across Lucy's face because of who the new voice belonged to. I did just now, Mirane. She seems to be shocked. Mirajan covered her mouth with one hand as she giggled, then sat down on a stool at Lucy's other side. I'm hardly surprised. Most people have a hard time comparing what they know about fairy tale to what they see, especially when Natsu is around. Lucy sat up straight again. Mention of Natsu reminded her about the fight going on. Don't you guys need to stop the fight? Lizanna shook her head, but Mirajan replied, this happens all the time really, besides. Whatever she was going to say was cut off as a bottle came flying through the air. One of Mirajan's hands shot up in the air just before it was about to reach her, and the bottle promptly shattered into pieces, landing on the floor around her. It is more fun this way, don't you think? Mirajan's head was tilted to the side a little as she offered Lucy a big smile, making the blonde girl have a hard time comprehending the lightning-fast reflexes she displayed when destroying the glass bottle compared to her rather carefree attitude. It didn't take long for both her and Lizanna to start giggling at Lucy's stunned face. Gah! Lucy blinked as Gray went flying past her, crashing into a table, splitting it into pieces. Something at the back of her mind told her to turn away, but she kept looking anyway, and promptly blushed when the dark-haired teen stood back up, wearing absolutely nothing. He must have felt the extra draft, however, as he quickly looked down and started yelping about missing his underwear. Looking back and forth between Lizanna and Mirajan to see if either of them were offended like she was further shocked to see both of them laughing like crazy. Happy was laughing as well, rolling around in circles on the floor and somehow getting rolled up in his own long tail as he did so, though he didn't seem to care. Looking in front of her once again, she promptly covered her eyes as she realized Gray was standing right in front of her, completely nude. Ah, don't stand in front of me like that. Look, I'm sorry, do you think I could borrow your underwear? Lucy's fist promptly shot out and clobbered Gray, sending him flying back towards Natsu. Hell no, don't ask a lady something like that. Listening as Lizanna and Mirajan started laughing again as they gently pat her shoulders, Lucy huffed to herself, watching the fight grow more intense. Several people started glowing as they began to call on their magical abilities. Shouldn't someone stop this before it gets out of hand? She heard Mirajan agree with her, but Lizanna simply giggled. Lucy turned to the other girl, eyebrow raised. What's funny? Lizanna simply pointed. That, turning to look where the girl was pointing, she immediately found herself looking up towards the face of a giant. Everything about it was concealed in darkness, except a scowling mouth revealing a lot of teeth, and scrunched up eyes glowing an ethereal white. You fools! What do you think you are doing? All activity in the guild hall stopped immediately. Most people started either shooting grins or scowling at each other, but everyone was offering hands to help people on the ground back to their feet. Oh, Master was here. I didn't even notice. Lucy looked at Mirajan in surprise. This huge giant was the guild master of Fairy Tale. Ha! Look how everyone stopped. You bunch of weaklings, this is my Y-erg. Lucy shrieked as Natsu was promptly stomped on by the giant guild master. Next to her, Lizanna let out a sigh as she covered her face with her hand. She was going to ask Lizanna what was going on, but the master's rumbling voice brought her attention back to the giant. A newcomer. Lucy offered a timid wave, and stood up. Why yes. I see. Lucy began to sweat as the scowl on the master's face turned into a grimace, but then to her amazement he began shrinking. He continued shrinking too, even after he had shrunk down to her height. By the time he was done, he was perhaps a little more than 1/3 of her height, but that was it. The master had turned into a little old man. He offered her a little grin and held a hand up in a wave. Yo! Hi! Turning around, he jumped up onto the railing of the second floor. At first, she was amazed such a little guy could jump that high, but giggled with everyone else when he misjudged the jump, and smacked into the railing. Grumbling, he managed to grab it, and pull himself up on top. Lucy listened carefully as he started explaining to members of the guild that he had recently gotten notice from the Mage Council about some of their more noteworthy escapades, and how bad the collateral damage had gotten. Looking around with a frown, she noticed that most people, especially the ones whose names and faces she recognized, seemed to be rather morose about the whole thing. During the conversation, she also noticed that Lizana and Happy had both moved over to Natsu, and were helping him climb back to his feet. The master continued speaking about the damage that had been caused, and eventually switched over to discussing what it meant to be a mage. Lucy had read many books about what a lot of people thought about what it meant to be a mage, but she'd never heard it directly from a mage's mouth, a guild master to boot. Even if he was talking down to the guild, she was completely engrossed in what he was saying. It wasn't until he pretty much said that the council could go screw themselves at the end of his speech, and everyone in the guild hall began cheering, did she understand what fairy tale was really like. They did what they believed was right. Nothing more, nothing less. She was snapped from her reverie as the master ignited the papers from the council that he was holding, and tossed them at Natsu, who promptly ate them. That was a sight she'd never get used to, watching someone eat fire. Mirajan waved as she walked by, apparently heading back to do whatever she was doing before Natsu started the fight. After waving back, Lucy looked around, to see Natsu and Lizana heading her way, Happy flitting through the air behind them. "So I hear Natsu saved you. Lucy, was it?" Lucy immediately smiled, watching as Lizana and Natsu sat down on the stools next to her. "Yep, someone who was impersonating Natsu, calling himself Salamander. He tried to fool me, telling me that he could get me into fairy tale. But it was all a trick, he was trying to gather slaves. He almost got me, too, until Natsu arrived and kicked his ass. Though, Lucy chuckled a little as she rubbed at the side of her head, he kind of destroyed half of a port in the process." Lizana simply chuckled, "That sounds like my Natsu." She leaned over and gave him a brief kiss on the cheek, which he barely acknowledged before standing up and pointing. "Ah, there he is. Gray, we didn't finish our fight." "No." Lizana grabbed Natsu's shoulder and slammed him back down onto his stool. He immediately winced and started rubbing around his backside. "Ow, Komon. Lizana, I still owe him. You can do that later. Get something to eat first, then rest and get your strength back." Natsu's eyes immediately started shining. "Oh yeah, food. Here I come." The pink-haired teen shot like a rocket over towards the counter, and Lucy noticed that Mirajan was standing over there, manning the bar. Turning back to Lizana, she watched as the other girl transformed her arm into something that looked like it was made of feathers, then cast a spell so that the broken table behind them somehow began to repair itself. When it was done, Lizana released the transformation on her arm, then turned to Lucy and grinned. "There we go, somewhere for Natsu to eat at now. What do you think of him, anyway?" "Natsu. Well, he's nice. He helped me out when I really needed it. But he can be a bit, well, stupid about some things. He also apparently has a problem with various forms of transportation, poor guy." Lizana laughed and nodded. "Yep, that sounds like my husband." Lucy's eyes became saucers. "Your husband." The white-haired girl looked like she was thinking for a moment, but nodded. "Well, we aren't officially married, but Naruto Nisan said we always act like we are, so we just went with it." "Naruto Nisan? I don't recognize anyone by that name." Lizana gave Lucy a brilliant smile. "He's the strongest mage in fairy tale." Naruto chuckled to himself as he flipped through the latest issue of Weekly Sorcerer. Once again, Claire had totally outdone herself. She had known his real name and who exactly was part of his team for over a year now, but was still keeping it out of her articles. She claimed that it was because she owed him at least that much, giving her all of his exclusives and random items to hand out to his fan club. Not only that, but since she had started writing her column about him in Fairy Tale, Weekly Sorcerer subscriptions had more than tripled. That alone so far garnered her 2 promotions and a large raise, so keeping the identities of him and his team a secret weren't that big of a deal. Besides, people liked the whole mystery factor about him. The fact that Erza's front company owned the publisher of Weekly Sorcerer might have influenced her decision about keeping the secret if they needed more leverage, but they both felt that Claire didn't necessarily need to know right now. They trusted her enough to do what she said she would and wouldn't do. Speaking of Erza, Naruto looked up from his table where he was seated at a cafe to where Erza was standing, watching as some of the locals decorated a huge horn from the demon that they had subdued. It wasn't more than a large animal with a horn that had a penchant for breaking things, but it was a big animal that could level a house when it charged, as it had done several times. The town paid well for the removal of the animal, and for some reason Erza felt like taking a trophy. So when she left it in the middle of the town, the locals had started celebrating immediately. When she mentioned she would keep it as a trophy, they took it upon themselves to start decorating it with various ornaments. Almost as if she could sense him looking, Erza turned to see Naruto gazing at her. She gave him a small smile, then turned to speak to one of the townspeople that was standing nearby. Naruto saw them nod, then she began walking briskly towards him. It didn't take long for her to arrive. As soon as she sat down, he pushed a drink over towards her, one that he had ordered earlier while she was talking with the locals. With a smile she took it, no questions asked, and downed the entire thing in one gulp. Most people gave her funny looks whenever she did that, and Kana had even begged Erza to teach her once, but his girlfriend simply shrugged her shoulders and said, "I don't have a gag reflex anymore thanks to Naruto." That comment got every one of the guys present in the guild hall at the time, including Natsu, to give him envious looks, while most of the girls seemed unsure if they should look at him, Erza, or their own feet. Kana tried asking if she could borrow Naruto for a little bit, but before Erza could answer, Mirajan proceeded to hang all over him, causing Erza to forget all about what Kana had asked. Sanatsu said he was going on a trip before we left, trying to hunt down Igneel again. Think he found him this time? Naruto snorted, sipping at what was left of his own drink. No, he won't, either. I still think you should tell him. Sighing, the blonde leaned back in his chair, staring at his girlfriend. She simply stared right back. If you want him to know so badly, then you tell him. She looked away for a brief second before looking at him once again. Any time her eyes left his during an argument, he knew that he'd already won it. It was one of her little quirks that he'd picked up on. It also helped that they'd had this little argument before. I can't, that would mean I broke my promise to you that I wouldn't tell. I don't break my promises. I don't either, and we've already been over this a bunch of times before. I can't say anything until Igneel makes his presence known. I feel like crap every time I see Natsu and can't say anything to him. It was Erza's turn to sigh as she leaned forward, propping her head up in her hands. As she moved forward, her eyes glanced down towards the magazine in front of Naruto. Is there a lot of fairy tale or other guild-related news? No. Not really, other than some members causing too much collateral damage, as usual. Even Kyuubi didn't have any comments. Well, none other than he's bored because there hasn't been any bloodshed for a couple months now. Damn right, sorry, I don't believe you or for a second. Well, I am, but it's not my fault that the mission boards have been relatively barren recently. You don't need a mission just to make something bleed. Perhaps not, but with a mission at least I know I'm making the right thing bleed. TCH, soft, not as soft as, I don't want to hear it. I'm going back to sleep. He was about to reply to Kyuubi until something soft impacted the side of his head. Woo, sorry, were you saying something? Erza rolled her eyes, pulling her hand back while offering an exasperated smirk. This was a quirk of Naruto's that she had gotten used to. Sometimes when things were peaceful he would sort of space out and talk with Kyuubi. Somehow he managed to talk to Kyuubi in battle without being distracted, but she just chalked that one up to adrenaline or something like it. Anything about you or us, great one. Oh, Naruto chuckled, shaking his head as he pushed it over to her. Just a small bit from Claire about our recent missions, where the next fan club meeting will be, and then the pictures from the photo shoot a month ago. Erza's face adopted a slight pinkish hue as she opened the magazine to the middle. How do they look? You helped us pick which ones to put in the magazine. I thought they looked great, and still do. The redhead, Med, as she flipped through the first couple pictures, though Naruto swore he saw her blushing a bit harder. She had completely protested the thought of posing in a bikini for hundreds of thousands of people to see, but over the course of a few months, Mirajan, Naruto, and Claire had all managed to finally break her down. Of course she was grumbling the entire time that Naruto just wanted a harem moment, and Mirajan was ever the willing participant. But after a while it seemed like she began to have a good time too, as evidenced by the final centerfold picture they agreed to use. The centerfold picture that Erza was now looking at that was causing her to blush furiously. "You look good in that picture." Erza nodded slowly, but otherwise said nothing and didn't move at all. Naruto turned in his seat and leaned over slightly, so that his armored chest gently pressed against her armored shoulder. Releasing the catch on the lower part of his mask so that his mouth was exposed, he leaned in closer to her ear. "I think you look really, really good in that picture, actually." That said, he used his tongue to lick along the back of her exposed ear. She shuddered. It was clearly visible, but it didn't take much longer for him to realize that she had placed a hand on his chest and was pushing him back into his chair. "Not in public." Naruto nodded, slowly, and with a sad sigh pushed the bottom of his mask up so that it latched back into place. He had tried some similar things before, but Erza was adamant about not having any public displays of affection. He supposed it was just her thing, and didn't really gripe about it. The one time he did ask about it, she looked distinctly lost and uncomfortable, and he didn't want to see that look again. Besides, it wasn't just him that she was tough on. She did it to everyone, even people she didn't know well. She would sometimes seem receptive of his attentions in the guild hall, especially if Mirajan was around, but otherwise she was cold as ice. In private, however, it was a totally different matter. Those who knew him well and called him a stamina freak, well, they obviously didn't know Erza. Hearing the magazine flip closed loudly, Naruto looked towards his girlfriend, only to see her stand up quickly. Without a word, she grabbed his arm, pulled him to his feet, and started dragging him away from the cafe and down the street. Surprised, Naruto quickly tossed some money on the table before she pulled him too far. "Hey, what's going on? We're going back to the hotel." Blinking, Naruto stared at the back of Erza's head as they walked swiftly. Her grip was like a vice on his forearm. There would definitely be no detours. "Already? It's still the early afternoon. Didn't you say that you still had some instructions to telegram to Trevor?" "The telegram office is the other way." Erza's head shook a couple times. "I can do that later. Here." She abruptly stopped, and Naruto barely managed to keep himself from crashing into her. Looking at her face, he noticed she was blushing slightly. Then he glanced down to see what she was holding out at him. They were his orange swim trunks. Erza, when did you get these?" "I put them in my requip inventory before we left. They were in our laundry, so it's not as if they were difficult to locate." He was confused, but grabbed the swim trunks anyway. "I brought my bikini from the photo shoot. I also reserved the pool on the top floor of the hotel for today, since we're heading back tomorrow. I was planning on only using it later this evening, but I changed my mind. Now come." She had turned back around before she began talking, but was looking at him over her shoulder. Even though Erza couldn't see it, as she talked, the grin on Naruto's face was definitely growing, among other things. Without a word, Naruto quickly tapped into his chakra and pushed it into his legs and feet, boosting him forward. Erza let out a small startled "eep" as he scooped her off the ground, then shot forward quickly towards their hotel. "I thought that might get you moving." Naruto absolutely adored that little smug grin she was giving him. "What can I say? You know how to push all the right buttons." Fairy Tail Guild card. Naruto. Fire Shadow, Uzumaki. Mage Council classification. S rank, registered. Notes. The only mage in Fairy Tail to not fail a single mission after 3.5 years of activity. Name submitted by Makarov Drayar as potential Wizard Saint candidate after long-term mission completion. Combat stages listed below. See Fairy Tail Guild Archives, Section 22, Row V, Release and Vanquish, for more information on status. Stage 0. Only utilizes martial combat skills, fists, feet, kunai knives, shuriken, and short sword. Stage 1. Magical powers, most are nature-oriented, often supplemented by heavy solid clone usage. See Era Council Archives, Section V, Row 2, Shadow Clones, for more information. Stage 2. Demonic energy cloak covers his body, control given to Kyuubi no Yuko. Stage 3. Version 1. Scarlet Demon Cloak, demonic energy usage, Naruto in control through all versions. Version 2. Bones form, reminiscent of a fox, providing extra offensive and defensive capabilities. Version 3. Full Fox Form. Naruto's body can only handle the full force of Kyuubi's power and hatred for about 5 to 10 minutes before he succumbs to unconsciousness. Stage 4. Naruto has remarked about becoming a sage, but exactly what it entails he has not clarified, nor has it been seen. He still claims there are even stages beyond his sage capabilities. Incredible. See Era Council Archives, Section 27, Row I, Fire Shadow, Naruto Uzumaki, for updates. Member since October 21, 782, 3 years, 7 months, 2 weeks. Age 20. Solo missions 751. Team missions 332. S-rank missions 41. SS rank missions 4. Reward to date 3,346,227,866 joules. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.